Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This is the first live episode that we're airing in 2025. We actually recorded this at the end of 2024, but we had so many episodes slotted to be released that when we were looking at the release calendar, we realized this wouldn't air for months. So I will just say that we intend to continue doing live podcasts in 2025. Watch out for those. It's an opportunity for you to come on the show or pre-submit a question to the show where we solve a challenge, answer a question you have. Of course, we have a giant back catalog of episodes where we've covered a lot of topics, not just live, but primarily pre-recorded ones that Nate and I have prepared. You can get our entire episode guide for free on growyourmusicstudio.com/7FMS. And if you go there, you'll see a section on our seven figure music school podcast homepage where you can download the episode guide for free. We have it's updated every week. We have the list of every episode we've ever done by category, and then you can even click on categories. So if you only want to look at episodes we did on marketing, or only on hiring, or only on retention, we have 18, as of this recording, we have 18 separate categories, and you could just go through and listen to a topic that's highly relevant to your school. So, having said that, we do like to do these more off-the-cuff episodes where we cover a lot of different topics as opposed to going deep on one, because these issues are typically ones where people are bringing a specific challenge that they're experiencing in their school and the context, and it allows us a chance to not just talk theoretically, but to apply some of the principles that we think about in terms of music school business, apply them to a specific situation. And in talking about those nuances, I think it throws a different light on some of these more general topics we talk about. Obviously, we're doing this all the time with folks on our Founders Forum, which is currently going on right now. We are not currently accepting new folks at the moment, but obviously stay up to date, because when we do accept new folks, we will happily invite you in if you meet a few criteria. So, having said all that, you ready to jump into the first question, Nate?
Yeah, I love it. We got a bunch of great ones today, so I'm ready to do it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, so this one came from Chris. How do you, this is an interesting question. I've never quite heard a question like this before. How do you hire or manage a team of differentiated teachers? Teacher A does lab, teacher B only does onboarding foundation young students, teacher C only does advanced one-on-one lessons. Nate, do you have any specific advice around this?
Well, I'm gonna just keep it real. I've already done two interviews today for two new positions at Brooklyn Music Factory, and there's some overlap in the songwriter's journey in the private lesson program, but the reality is they're two unique positions. As you know, my initial thought, Daniel, is pretty straightforward. As our schools grow, we're going to get more refined in terms of who we're hiring and for what precise position. And teachers are no different than your, management and your director roles and your administrative support roles and your sales roles and all those things. So the first thing I would just say is it's a great question if in fact this owner is at the stage of their growth where Chris is saying, "Hey, I'm ready to hire. I have enough inventory to hire for a lab teacher. I have enough inventory to hire for the specific product in our suite of products that we offer." So that's my first just immediate response, is that don't shy away from that at all. And then, the deeper question, of course, which I think you and I should bat back and forth a little bit, is, okay, once you have hired a teacher into a specific role within your school, how do you actually, from a director standpoint or from a management standpoint, be able to serve all these different roles, which is really what I think is baked into the question. In other words, it's more of like a management 101 or 201 question, which is, hey, I now need to figure out how to help a number of different roles at the same time as CEO of this school. And so maybe I'll pause there to see what that triggers for you, Daniel. But that's just my initial reading of the question: is yes, Chris is talking about different teachers, i.e., teaching different things or different classes. But really, what he's talking about is what I would call a growth org chart. Like, in other words, this is a growing company and the org chart is changing. And how do I manage now a growing team in different roles? That's how I read the question, actually.
Okay. I look at this and say, What's the challenge here?
Yes.
Why wouldn't you be able to hire or manage teachers that do different things? It's almost like there's context missing from this question that because I don't understand why you couldn't hire. Is it possible to hire three teachers? Yes. Is it possible to hire three teachers of different skills? Yes. The only challenge I would say here, knowing him a little bit more, I actually know his
Nice.
school, um, is that he is kind of in a startup phase where he is hiring his first teachers.
He's building team now.
Yep. So he's just beginning that journey. And I would say, and I think this is helpful to everyone, that it is possible. I've said this on this podcast before. It is possible to get exactly what you want. I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I can't hire because I don't have 150 students already." They feel like they're in this catch-22 of I don't have enough students to give a teacher, but a teacher won't join unless I can promise them a certain number of hours.
Mm,
And yes,
right.
that does make it more challenging to hire someone right from the jump, but it you do have to put exactly what you need out there and what the terms are going to be. Don't feel uncomfortable asking a teacher or an admin support person or a part-time social media person, like, yeah, I only need you for 10 hours a week. Are you cool with that? Oh, yeah, I don't have any
Mm,
students right now, but I will be building those over the next 3 to 6 months. And this is where I intend to get you should all of our plans go well. Are you okay in the beginning with not having a full roster of students? Will that be okay for you? Ah, teacher one says that won't work for me because I'm having to quit this other job to make this possible. So I have to replace my income. Teacher two says, oh, yeah, I've already got two other like side hustles that I'm doing. So I'll just work those harder while you're building up my student base.
yeah, and I love that. I don't have the same perspective on Chris's school that you do, so I appreciate that. And so one of the things I did, Daniel, is actually we talked about this in our Evernote episode that we did that came out maybe about a
October
month
of
and
last
change.
year.
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. But you had this great technique where you said, Nate, I don't even know if you remember this, dude, but you said, I just pulled up an interview and I pulled back and saw the first, I mean, I pulled up an Evernote and I looked at the first note I ever created. And what
Yep.
I did is I then took that, remember that? And we went back and we were like, when did we start using Evernote? What I did is I went into my hiring notebook in Evernote and I scrolled all the way back to
Wow.
2018 to look at the
Holy
first
cow.
note that we created in there around hiring. And I thought it might benefit our listeners just to see where our heads were then. Because
Mm.
while we were a larger school than Chris's in 2018, we probably had a team of uh, 12 to 15 teachers
Mm.
plus administrators. We weren't a team of 30 like we are now. And so we were learning. And a lot of the notes back there are just around getting a real system going. For example, knowing exactly who within Brooklyn Music Factory was going to do what steps. So, like at that time, my partner, Pira, and myself were the ones who did every interview. So we sort of we were the ones who tried to recruit and try to find anyone and everyone where we could, and then we always did that initial interview, and then we would hand it off to another team member to review, for example, the scorecards that we would create from the interview. And then we would hand off that score. That person would say, hey, we'd like them to demo with these students. And so we were just beginning to build a system around how to actually hire repeatedly, season after season after season after season. And so what I would say to Chris too around this, Daniel, kind of to double down with your follow-up question is, first of all, get really clear on the areas of your hiring funnel where you feel weak, right? Just understand that you're not supposed to be a total badass at every stage of a hiring funnel. And by a hiring funnel, I mean from the point of uh, gauging your inventory, like you were saying, you only got 8 hours for this teacher. First of all, gauging exactly what you're offering in terms of hours and inventory. Secondly, creating different job descriptions for each specific hire, i.e., we have a job that is going to be 2 days a week, up to 8 hours of teaching in our guitar department. Get really specific around that stage, writing a good job description, then begin to learn how to tweak your different recruitment levers, your Indeeds for paid leads, to your network, to your social media, to your leaning into teachers that already work in your school, friends and family, etc. Moving into the interview, moving into the demo, moving into the actual making a choice, making an offer, then recruiting once they get the offer to try to really pull them in and make them a long-term opportunity. Like there's a lot of stages to the hiring funnel. And so for you, Chris, just out of the gate, decide that this is a learning opportunity because that's what that launch, your startup phase is all about. It's a lot of learning. So just decide you're going to become really good at 2 or 3 stages of the funnel and then understand that you're not going to be very good at about another 4 or 5 of those stages to begin with. Um, and if you have no idea what we're talking about around stages of hiring, well, we've got some really good episodes on hiring. And as soon as I stop talking, I'll grab a couple of app numbers for you. But just understand that you're at the beginning of putting that machine together. And so some parts you're going to understand really well, and other parts of your machine, you're going to be like, wow, I need to come back to a live Q&A and ask about this specific piece.
Mm, I love that. I I'm I feel really good about that answer, Nate. And I know in past lives we've often spent the first like we'll just really park
Yeah,
on the first question, but
totally.
I'm actually really happy with that. Let's move to number two. How's that sound?
Totally. Meanwhile, I'm going to dig up a couple of apps for Chris and say them out loud later in the pod.
Okay,
Okay, go
okay.
ahead.
All right. So question two is from Paul, who's actually here. So I don't know if I said this at the front end, but we are doing this live right now. We have people in our studio audience, so to speak. So with Paul being here, we can actually even ask some context questions. So the question's pretty simple. How do you keep churn low for your studio? What specific actions do you regularly take to ensure students stay? So right off the bat, I'm going to ask
Hmm.
one follow-up question, Paul, if that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. I know that you have probably listened to every episode of the podcast. Yeah, he's
Yes.
shaking his head. Yes, yeah. Okay. Um, and there, and even in having conversation with you, I know you're really familiar with, let's say, how Nate tracks retention at BMF. I know that you're familiar with other ways to track retention numbers. We were actually even talking about this earlier today before the podcast. So I know you're probably asking a more sophisticated version of this. So I don't want to just go with retention 101,
Sure.
unless you want us to talk through that. I mean, I'm happy to do that, but maybe like what are the nuances here that would be really helpful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've looked through my data over the last 2 years of reasons for churn in my studio. We're in a military community, so some of these students are going to be moving, and that's just part of it. And I totally get that. I am also removing the data out for the summer months because, sometimes we'll have a 19% drop in the summer because people are leaving. It's not because of us, it's because they're traveling on vacation and everything. So the ones that I can directly affect is what I'm looking at. So I've got some where the parent will say, "Oh, well, they're not practicing at home, so we're not going to continue because I want to make sure that I'm paying for something that they're interested in doing." Or it's an interest is starting to wane, or it started getting difficult, and now they're deciding, "Oh, I don't think I want to do this anymore because it got tough." Other things would be finances would come up, and I'll do things to help families out, to have them to continue to stay. And then another one would be scheduling. So I try and do everything I can to work with their schedule. Sometimes it's just not able to because of busyness, right? Put that under the busyness category of sports and gymnastics and other competing things that would also fill that spot in their life of some skill building. So my question is what are some of the things that I can be doing consistently, myself and also my instructors, to maintain the interest of the student? It's really internal sales now, right? I have no problem getting them here. There's some months where I have 100% close rate on bringing students in, but it's the retaining them and keeping them with their interest in lessons and wanting to continue.
Nate, you want to jump in on that first?
Yeah, well, I want to commend you on something very specific here. The fact that you can put in very specific categories what each parent's resistance is to continuing lessons, and then you say lack of practice, complex schedule. You had about 5 or 6 different categories. That is an essential first step, right? Because what you're trying to do is actually get out in front of that resistance, right? You're trying to be the person who says, I know you have a busy schedule. This is why we operate the way we do. This is why we have a flexible Saturday drop-in class for whenever you can't make your regularly scheduled class. This is what, right? Or lack your student. I mean, obviously, there is no one listening to this pod right now, Paul, that doesn't get the why isn't my student practicing enough, right? I'm not talking about across the board because, of course, at Brooklyn Music Factory, you have like this 7 to 10 year journey, and we know in the journey when they start being self-motivated, right? So we can predict when a kid starts in mini keys that there's a certain point 3 to 4 years later where there's going to be a self-directed week, right? And so what we want to do is we want to get out in front of that conversation. So things that we do at Brooklyn Music Factory is we take those different categories you're talking about, and we actually create email templates around them. We create posters around them. We create language we use live at events around them. We will make sure that we're speaking to them before the parent speaks to us. Dig it? So back in the day when we were all blogged out and loved doing our blog, that would be one of my jobs as CEO was to, while you were talking, Paul, I pulled up our Airtable, which showed all the cancellations in the last, actually the view I was looking at was the last 7 days, but I looked at all the cancellations from the last 2 months, and I'm just looking through what all the parents said was why. And it's in their language. And that's the most powerful language you can use to get out in front of this, is to literally take the parent. Here, let me read you one right now. I'm looking at my Airtable. It says, here's a student that left. He left right away. He tried for 3 weeks, but the mom says he's very nervous about new classes. And his mom really tried hard to get him to attend, but he's just super nervous socially. He's super nervous in a new area. So I could literally create a fascinating blog post on how to manage your child in a new class, like a mini keys, if your child's extremely nervous. Here's the 5 ways that we work with you to ensure that your student will feel a little less nervous when they meet Jerry, their teacher, and what you can do in the community room to put them at ease. Then what you can do as a parent by sitting by the door for the first lesson, maybe even coming in for the first 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Like, now you're creating this dialogue in the language that they're already using, and that they're feeling like you're hearing them before they even called you or wrote you to say, we're dropping for this reason. Mm-hmm. Right? And the goal is not to say that we have 0 attrition, because no school that I've ever met has 0 attrition, right? What's outside of your sphere of influence? Well, the very first thing you said, you're in a community that's transient, right? Like I'm posted here for 2 to 4 years, I'm guessing. And then I have to move somewhere else because that's just that's the career path. So that's outside of your sphere. You can't control that, nor do you want to try to control that. Of course, you can get creative with like expanding to online lessons to serve that community after they leave and things like that. There's a lot of different ways to imagine serving them beyond the geographical location. However, you leave those out for now. Instead, you take what's within your circle of influence and you look at those points of resistance from parents and say, hey, we hear you. You're really busy. So we're designing a new system for our spring that allows those busy families to drop in periodically if they have to miss. Because guess what? Everybody has to miss sometime, right? That's just normal. So I don't know if that helps. Does that help, Paul, a little bit? Like
that does.
So begin it.
So kind of what I'm hearing is start doing all of the messaging ahead of time so that next time I'm encountering that, I've already got everything really nice, tight, and efficient in the messaging so that I can talk with that parent about that. And then also just knowing when some of these things will start coming up. Maybe it's 2 months in and it starts getting difficult, and start talking with the parent, hey, your child is probably going to be experiencing some feelings around being a little frustrated with where they're at in their skill. Here are some things that we can do to help with that. And like starting getting ahead of that messaging so that I can be proactive about it and communicating really well with families. Is that kind of what
yeah, and here's a concrete example. So at Brooklyn Music Factory, you know, we're game-based. We have big music games. All of our students play them. They sort of will age out of them maybe by 15, 16, 17, but they're playing when they're little. And we already know that we're going to get families that are like, hey, I can't log in. Hey, my kid's not playing a game. Hey, can you explain why they should play a game instead of play piano? Like we know all the questions, right? And so essentially, we're not only organizing ourselves, Paul, as owners, but we're organizing the communication for the teachers as well, right? You're handing your teachers the messaging because they need to know it, right? It's not like Jerry is just going to be fluent in why we're a game-based methodology or how to quickly and easily pull up the login information. Why do we not need him to be like that? Because we want him to stay focused and present on the actual in-class experience. So what are we doing is we're sort of empowering our teachers by giving them some of these little, these messaging nuggets, if you will. So that's like a very real BMF every autumn. And we've gone so far, Paul, just to really like sharpen the point of the spear here. We will literally set up a table in our community room that just says, logged into big music games, and all we're doing is helping them log in. Like it's just, and we will have teachers that sit there in the community room helping a parent figure out how to bookmark the game logged in on their phone. Like you're just trying to help them get out in front of any frustration. So not only organize your communication for when they reach out, as you put well, but also anticipate, as you followed up with, exactly when you're going to feel the resistance. And then, Paul, just get out in front of it. No parent minds being overly communicated with. Mm-hmm. I promise you there's no parent that's like, wait, one more email, which is going to get us to a next question here for today. But no parent's going to be like, wait, one more email on how to inspire my child to practice. No parent's going to be bummed out that you're thinking about their kid and how to inspire them. Never going to happen. Right? Just think, you don't mind anyone in your community like reaching out with ways to support your child, like maybe on the soccer team or whatever. Like that just doesn't happen. We're more than happy to talk about our children. In fact, it's our favorite topic. So that's my only follow-up, but I hope that's helpful. This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons.
And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games.
Here's my question, Paul, based on what he just said, is there a way that you would that's what I'm looking for here. Would you expand this question in any way, or would you change the wording of it now that you've heard what Nate has to say to get even deeper into the topic? Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Right. I know that you've done an episode on this back in April of 2022, and I think there was another one as well, specifically with retention in the title. I'm going to go back through and then look at those again. I know of another studio, specifically on the messaging. Brian King said that he has his teachers reach out to a certain amount of students, like they're just required to reach out to like 10% of their students that are assigned to them every month with like a progress report update. And it doesn't have to be long. It's just a couple of sentences on how they're doing, maybe how far they've gone in their books, things that they're doing great, things for them to work on, right? So kind of doing that compliment sandwich. And that was something I was talking with my wife about today. Is I think that's going to be something that we can really do well, just assigning each of our instructors to talk with these parents and giving this reports and updates, because that's something that parents are looking for is, how is my child doing? How are they doing right now? And I really feel like if they're not getting that on a consistent basis, they feel like they don't know, and they're just like, I don't know, what I'm paying for, if I'm getting a result or not, because many of these parents are not checking in with their own children anyway. They're just sending them to classes and just hoping for the best. And if we are communicating better with them, I feel like we're going to get an even better result from that. So yeah, that was really good, Nate. I'm definitely taking that to heart. I'm going to be writing out some specific messaging and going over that with my instructors. So if they encounter a problem specifically, that they know how to address it. This last week, a parent came to one of my instructors and said, hey, we're running into some financial problems. We're going to have to pause for a little bit, right? And my daughter was my instructor, and she's like, oh, okay, well, please text my dad to let him know that. So she did, and I got back with her, and we worked something out so that we're able to keep her going as a student. And I already have messaging on that because I've dealt with that so many times. I know exactly what to say, and they're like, oh, great, yes, let's continue. So that with these other issues that come up, because it's the same things. It's the same things that come up.
Yeah, you're helping. In this case, it's your daughter who's the teacher, so she says text dad. But it's you're helping your teachers know who to turn to with the correct response. You're helping your teachers respond correctly when it's appropriate, right? And then I just want to highlight something you said about the reports, sending, like Brian, I think Brian does this really well. You were referencing him in this sort of asking the teachers to send updates and reports. There is nothing more effective that we have found in Brooklyn Music Factory's history than a photo and a video of the parent of the child, right? I am going to read you not one, but 2 Google reviews that we got this summer that speak specifically to what we're talking about right now, Paul. And it kind of blew our mind because we've been doing this a long time. But we're starting to get Google reviews where they talk exactly about the emails we send. which is fascinating for so many reasons. But let me just read you a couple. Great camp experience for our family. Brooklyn Music Factory was communicative, made it a lot of fun, and our extended family loved being able to watch the end of week performances remotely because we live stream those. But fascinating that they said communicative. Here's another one. My daughter really enjoyed summer camp here. The private lessons were incredible too. We loved that they sent us videos of her lesson so we could see how much she was enjoying it and progressing. I will just say one last thing, and then we got to move to the next question. If you want to make a major impact right now in your role at your school, take your phone out, go in, and make it a 4-week project where every parent is going to get a video of their child at least once in the next 4 weeks. That's it. And then just write a little quick note, literally from your phone. Bam. Here's David. Look at David moving through book 2 of Piano Express. Wow, look at that left hand. Amazing. And send it. Done. Move on to the next child. Do you have like 190 students? Do that 190 times in 4 weeks. And you will, of course, that's long tail lag measure, attrition, right? Retention. You're not going to see the benefit of that immediately, but you'll hear back from those parents. I promise you. Just like that parent who you texted with a new tuition possibility, I'm sure you heard back with gratitude from them. Right? So that's all I got to say about it. It's a great question. It's one of the most relevant questions we will ever have in the world we work in, which is how to retain families so we can truly serve them over as long as we're meant to. Right?
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, totes. Thanks for the question.
This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. Well, you referenced it a second ago, Nate, the next question, but I did just want to say, I really like that practical, just everything you said there about what you all are doing, the practical idea around filming video. Oftentimes it really comes down to that, because my experience has been in working with people, and now the podcast having been around for so long, is I'll work with someone who has listened to the podcast, feel inspired by the podcast, want to get into the nitty gritty of how that gets applied, and they'll either do it through the coaching or through the mastermind founders forum. And then we get to an actual problem. And when we get into the fine details, it's like, oh yeah, we talked about that on the podcast. And they might even remember a few of the things that we said, or some folks like taking notes or that sort of thing. But then when it gets into the actual details of it, it's like, well, how did you execute on that? And it's like, well, that's kind of where I was feeling challenged. And then invariably what I do is get into the fine details of execution, building systems around certain things. Because a lot of times we talk at the conceptual level in the podcast, but getting into the execution and specifically the nuances of execution in light of your school, in light of where you're located, your culture, who you're serving, because having a music school on the south side of Indianapolis is different than having a music school in Gowanus and Brooklyn. You know, like there's so many fine details where all this is important. So I like the practicality of that, you know, because sometimes we just don't get the time to go deeply into that.
Yeah,
so anyway.
and you know, well, I appreciate what you're saying about the systems, because it's easy to listen to a pod, ours or others, and think you're supposed to do everything you hear,
Hmm.
right? And
That's a
it's just that's not actually the value of our podcast, or there's many great ones that serve small businesses. The value of the podcast is to be able to be self-reflective enough that when you listen, you find that one nugget of gold that you're like, oh, that's the thing I'm going to learn how to build into my existing systems in my company.
yeah.
That's the thing I need to do. And that's the value. Like, we're going to go crazy if we think we're supposed to do absolutely every tip and trick that Daniel and Nate, throw out here. But it's not that, it's that we are going to figure out how to reflect on what we do well and what we don't do well. And then we're going to adopt certain elements. And back to your point, Daniel, because I think you're really strong in this area, we're going to figure out what's currently not working in your habits as a business owner to get you to adopt those and implement those. And we're going to unpack that in our self-reflection. And we're going to say, wait a minute, I see the issue. Like in my case, Daniel, you know me really well. In my case, it's like I'm a business dev guy. I love developing new businesses. So I always need to be really careful that I don't have a very clear roadmap on what that new business idea is and how to assess it before I go even to my partner Pira and say, "Hey, what do you think about this opportunity?" She's going to ask very tight and deep questions. So, anyways, it's like take something like that photo video idea, Paul, we just talked about, and be like, okay, how the follow-up question would be, what would I need to change or let go of in my current way of operating to ensure that I could do that? 190 photos and emails or videos and emails over the month of November. Because that's the real deeper question. Operationally, what do I need to change in order to pull that off?
To your point a second ago here, Alyssa and I made a video that we released in December.
Nice.
On priorities. And the number one issue that we deal with in coaching, which is oftentimes we get coaching clients where they have if they even have a to-do list, it has 163 things on it, and they're having trouble distinguishing which thing is the most important. And actually, Alyssa and I made this series of videos in not opposition to the podcast. The podcast here tends to talk on like business theory, topics of business, that sort of thing. Alyssa and I specifically wanted to make a series of videos, which we released in December, on the human side, completely the human side of running a business. Since the podcast goes into detail on so many of these topics, as I was talking about at the beginning, and one of them, a huge one, was around priorities. So we'll link that in the show notes. Those were released last month, and I definitely recommend people look up the one on priorities, because if you if you have all these things on your list and you're not entirely sure which one is the most leverageable, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck, or the most value for the time spent, that's a prioritization problem. And we talk through how we help clients set priorities. Anyway, let's go to question 3. I actually kind of like this one, Nate, because we've never really covered something like this in the pod, and it's highly specific, which oftentimes leads us to talking about things that we wouldn't, even if we were to cover this topic generally, I'm going to read the whole
lay
thing.
it on us. Yep.
I'm wondering what the right balance of emailing students is. At the moment, I email the student after the first lesson, after a month, and then every 3 months after that. We've begun sending out congratulatory anniversary emails. My concern or question is, am I overdoing it and bombarding our students with unwanted emails? Since I will be honest, most emails don't get a reply. So that's the question. Nate, to some degree, you did answer this partially in what you were saying to Paul. So don't feel as if you have to repeat anything you said there. But do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, let's even just start with the basic question he asked. Are we overdoing it? What's your opinion?
Hell no. I
Okay.
already answered that before. You cannot over communicate with the parent if it's about their child and with the child's interest in mind. Basically, if you are sending a thoughtful message about the child that is going to be beneficial for the mom, dad, or otherwise the caregiver, you cannot overdo it. Um, I want to. So that's the short answer to that.
Let me
Though,
jump in. Let me jump in
yeah,
with my
you
short
jump in
answer.
before I go.
Yeah.
Before I go to the 10,000-foot view on this question.
Yeah. So I agree with Nate. I only want to amplify one thing, and that is I think the most important marketing you do is internal, not external. As much as I talk about external marketing, as much as I talk about um, ad platforms and this and that, and here's optimization, sales, like keeping a student is in my opinion, it feels more important than finding a new one.
Hmm.
And the way you keep that student is good product and strong internal marketing, because you can have a good product, but if people don't realize how good it is, then how good is it really? It's almost like a corollary of that if a tree falls in the forest but no one hears it, did it make a sound type of thing. I literally had
Hmm.
experiences where I was talking to families in my studio, and even though I'd been fairly vocal about some of the particularities about my studio or some of the uniquenesses of my studio, they get in, the kid would finish their first book and the parent would be like, "Oh, that's great." And then I would contextualize what that meant by saying, in most studios, students get through their book in this amount of time. And they just got through it in this, much shorter amount of time.
Right.
And then the parent now has a totally different view on that information. Now, just imagine that, but across almost every point in your studio, they are underinformed and they cannot value you unless you have to not only deliver the value, you have to show them and tell them that you're delivering the value, because they don't even entirely know what the value is. So you have to contextualize every milestone in that child's development, every milestone in what they just did. Here's this, here's this. And so you do that in a variety of ways: face-to-face conversations, you do it through email, you do it through text, you do it through social media. This kind of bombardment. So I think, this person said that they're sending out 4 emails, and is that too much? That's the other bone I like to pick with people. I've said this in the podcast before. I've said this for my marketing training, which you can find out more about if you go to GregoMusicStudio.com/free. We give part of our marketing training away for free. I want to communicate so much that these people are almost considering taking out a restraining order on me. Like that,
Yeah.
That's how much you should be communicating, because it is even more important now that you do that because of how much more difficult it is now to cut through all the noise. You do have an advantage though, and this is why it won't be considered annoying. There is this old phrase, I can't remember where I heard it now, but oh no, I heard it from Jay Abraham. He said, when people pay, they pay attention. When people pay, they pay attention.
Yeah.
That is almost out of order. You'd almost think like, oh, I have to get people to pay attention first, and then they'll pay. That is true. But what is more true is that once they're actually, like, I literally have had experiences where I bought a product because I knew I needed to focus on this area in my life or in my business. And I knew if I pay, I know I will feel this obligation to now take this more seriously in my business. I literally have joined
Yes.
courses and or masterminds because I knew that I was getting complacent in a certain area of my business, and I knew that the money would make me pay more attention to it.
It's no question. Yeah, like the wherever you're finding, whenever someone's like, "Hey," I mean, I ask all the time for help from my business friends, and they say you should go enroll in this course, and I feel resistance to it. That's because I'm not. It's because I'm not owning up to the learning opportunity. Basically, I'm like if you send me something, Daniel, I'm asking you a pointed question about a specific thing that I need to learn about. And you're
Yeah.
like, here's a great opportunity. Go spend $99 with this dude, which I've totally done because you've
Yeah.
sent it to me. And I'm like, I don't know if I should spend the $99. It has nothing to do with the $99. It has to do with my commitment.
Well, I have a hunch that for you and maybe some folks who are a little bit farther down the business road, at this point now, it's almost like the money doesn't even matter to me. It's more about the time I have to spend on it.
Right.
But the money is enough of a weight on me that then I will prioritize the time. But,
Yes. You're flipping it.
yeah. Yeah. But the whole even reason I brought that up is because they won't, now that they're paying you, now that their child is in your studio, or now that this adult student has enrolled with you, they're not necessarily going to feel annoyed when you send out information about the product that they are currently paying for every single month. So you actually have some grace from them, and they have now made room for you in their lives and in their consciousness, for you to they're essentially inviting you in. And so now you've got their attention. What are you going to do with it? Be very, very
Yes.
reward their trust in you with good communications, thoughtful communications. Give them the relevant information and quote unquote market to them still.
The
Get them to more fully engage in your product. Keep selling the product to them and how good it's going to be for them or their child.
We have to be very clear, and you put it well, Daniel, that when we have the trust of these families and when we're reaching out to them, we are doing it we have to know why we're doing it. It's with the intention of benefiting their child, who's the student, right? It's not with the intention of trying to get a response. It's with the idea of how will I help the parent be able to help their kid. You need to make sure that you're communicating with your families about every upcoming holiday, school closure, gig, recital. Those things need to be in stereo with them. You need to have posters on the wall. The teachers need to have memorized the next school closure. They need to be communicating with families. That email needs to go out to families. Those are purely logistical. Why? Because no parent wants to be surprised or embarrassed when they don't know that. No parent wants to show up and go, oh, be the one parent who's knocking on the locked door. Dig it? So that's one version of communication. The next version of communication is one, Daniel, you were just talking about. It's all about the service you're giving and reselling them on it. What are the benefits? Where is your child in this journey? Right? Back to Daniel's comment around the pace at which David's moving through the curriculum, right? Like we send a video about the stage at which we are in with the songwriter's journey at Brooklyn Music Factory. Look, he's finished his second verse. He's about to record a video and send it to his bandmates, right? That's very clear about where he is in the course of a 15-week season. So that's the second type of communication. And then the third type of communication is, how do you benefit this family beyond the class that they're enrolled in? That's when, we just had our date night Friday. We email the families with kids that are between the ages of 4 and 9 that would benefit from a date night, affordable childcare on a Friday night with pizza that comes with it. So now we're all of a sudden or we did a open mic coffee house with free food and a bunch of teenagers playing their original music Saturday night. So now we're actually messaging to them in a different channel. It's not about their individual child. It's about how their family can be part of this community, right? So you begin to imagine your communication in different channels with different outcomes and different intentions, right? So that's the only last thing I was going to say. As your school grows and as you get more systematic in the way you communicate, and as you are very comfortable with over-communicating, then you'll begin to parse your list in a very strategic way, and you will have parents thanking you like they did this weekend at Brooklyn Music Factory, because on Friday night, a bunch of families came to a date night, and on Saturday night, a totally different chunk of families came to a teen coffee house.
But yeah, Nate, we're right about an hour right now, and that's probably a good place to cut it off. So always love doing these lives. Thanks for the off-the-cuff comments, Nate. Thanks for everyone who came to hang out live. And we will see you all in the next one.